The big round room was full of noise and worry. The 12 different alien races sat around the huge table talking fast and loud. Their voices mixed together like a storm of strange sounds. The Vorthan creatures clicked their sharp claws on the metal table over and over again. The sound was like rain on a roof, but much more angry. The Nexari looked like walking crystals, and they hummed together in high, sweet voices, but even their music sounded scared today. At the far end of the long table sat the human woman. Her name was Kim Hannah, and she looked very different from all the other beings in the room. She was small compared to most of them. Her skin was soft, and her hair was black and shiny. She wore simple clothes that were blue and white, not like the fancy robes and armor that the other ambassadors wore. Her dark eyes moved slowly around the room, watching everyone, but she did not make any sound. The room was huge, with walls that went up so high you could barely see the top. The ceiling had lights that looked like stars, and they made everything glow with soft white light. The table was made of some kind of stone that was smooth and cold to touch. It was so big that 50 people could sit around it easily. Today it was full of worried aliens, all talking at once. Kim Hannah had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now. In all that time, she had never been quiet like this. She was famous in the whole galaxy for talking a lot and for being very good at making peace between different groups. When two species were fighting, she would stand up and talk for hours until they agreed to stop. When there was a problem with trade or planets, she would find a way to make everyone happy. The other ambassadors knew her well. The Vorthan delegate was named Crix, and he had worked with Hannah many times. He kept looking at her with his big yellow eyes, wondering why she was not speaking. The Nexari group leader was called Melodia, and she kept trying to catch Hannah's attention with her crystal singing, but Hannah did not respond. Even the Mindari, who were very shy and quiet creatures, kept whispering to each other and pointing at the human woman. Everyone remembered how Hannah had stopped the big war between the Corvan Empire and the Stellar Federation. She had talked for 2 whole days without stopping. She had made both sides see that fighting would hurt everyone and that sharing was better than stealing. She had saved millions of lives with her words. She had made 17 different peace treaties, and every one of them was still working, but today was different. Today there was a new problem, and it was worse than anything they had seen before. The Zelphic Confederation had come to the galaxy like a dark cloud. They were big and mean, and they liked to hurt others. They had already taken over 6 different worlds. They would come to a planet and tell everyone living there that they now belonged to the Zelphic. If people tried to fight back, the Zelphic would destroy their cities and make them slaves. The Zelphic ambassador was in the room today, and he was the scariest thing most of the other aliens had ever seen. He was 3 times as tall as Hannah, and his skin looked like black metal that had been polished until it shined. He had 6 arms, and each arm was as thick as a tree trunk. His face had no nose, just 2 holes for breathing, and his mouth was full of teeth that looked like knives. His eyes were red like fire, and they never seemed to blink. His name was Vorthak, and he stood up to speak. The whole room got quiet when he moved because he was so big and frightening. When he talked, his voice sounded like rocks being crushed in a machine. It was deep and rough, and it made the walls shake a little. I am here to tell you about our next expansion, he said. The world you humans call New Bizan will belong to us soon. There are 50 million humans living there, but that does not matter to us. We will take the planet in 10 days. If they try to fight us, we will kill them all. If they try to run away, we will hunt them down. The planet has good soil and lots of water, and we need it for our people. The room exploded with angry voices. The Vorthan delegate Crix jumped up and started clicking his claws so fast it sounded like machine gun fire. He was shouting about galactic law and how the Zelphic could not just take planets that belonged to other people. The Nexari started singing, but their song was not pretty now. It was harsh and angry, like the sound of breaking glass. The Mindari whispered to each other very fast in their own language, but even though they were quiet, everyone could tell they were upset. The other alien races all started talking at once. Some were standing up and waving their arms or tentacles or wings. Some were making threatening gestures at Vorthak, but through all this noise and anger, Kim Hannah did not move. She sat in her chair like a statue. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and she was looking straight at Vorthak, but she did not say anything. Her face showed no emotion at all. She could have been sleeping with her eyes open minutes. went by and still she did not speak. Crix kept looking at her, expecting her to stand up and start one of her famous speeches about peace and understanding. Melodia sang directly at her, trying to get her attention, but Hannah did not even turn her head. The other ambassadors started to get worried. Why was the human not talking? Where was her plan to fix this problem? Verthak noticed too. He had been expecting the human to jump up and start begging him to negotiate. He had heard stories about how she always tried to find peaceful solutions to every problem he thought she would offer him. Money or trade deals or maybe even other planets in exchange for leaving New Beeson alone, but she just sat there watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to look right through him. It made him uncomfortable in a way he did not understand. He was used to seeing fear in people's eyes when he threatened them. He was used to hearing desperate pleas for mercy. But this human woman was giving him nothing. The silence from her was louder than all the shouting from the other aliens. It was like a hole in the noise that made everything else seem less important. Vorthak found himself staring at her, trying to figure out what she was thinking. But her face was like a mask that showed nothing. He tried to ignore her and continue talking to the other ambassadors. Your laws mean nothing to us, he said. We are strong and you are weak. We take what we want and there is nothing you can do to stop us. New Beeson will be ours, and after that we will take more worlds. Still Hannah said nothing. She did not even blink. The other ambassadors kept arguing and shouting, but their voices seemed to get quieter as they all started to notice the human silence. It was like she was sucking all the sound out of the room just by sitting there. Finally, the meeting ended with no solution. The other ambassadors filed out, still talking to each other in worried voices. Many of them stopped by Hannah's seat and tried to talk to her, but she just gathered her papers and walked away without saying a single word to anyone. As she left the room, everyone watched her go. Her footsteps were very quiet on the hard floor. She walked slowly and calmly, like someone taking a peaceful walk in a garden, but there was something about the way she moved that made everyone feel nervous, like they were watching a sleeping tiger. Vorthak watched her leave too, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never felt before. It was not fear exactly, but it was close to it. There was something about the human silence that bothered him more than any threat or angry words ever had. It was like she knew something that he did not know, something that would change everything. The other ambassadors left, talking among themselves about what they could do to help the humans on New Beeson. Some suggested sending aid ships, others thought they should try to negotiate with the Zelphic themselves. But deep down they all knew that without Hannah speaking up there was probably nothing they could do. As the great chamber emptied out, the lights began to dim. The star patterns on the ceiling slowly faded until only a few remained glowing like distant suns. The huge table sat empty now, with only the memory of all the worried voices that had filled the air. But the memory of Hannah's silence seemed to fill the room even more than all the noise had. Her quiet was like a warning that something was about to change, something big and important and maybe dangerous. None of them knew it yet, but that silence was the most important thing that had happened in the galaxy for a very long time. Back on Earth, in the big city of Seoul, President Park Min-soo sat in his office on the top floor of a tall building. The office had huge windows that looked out over the Han River, where people were walking and children were playing in the parks. Everything looked so peaceful and normal, but Min-soo knew that this quiet time was about to end. On his desk was a short message from Hannah. It was only 3 sentences long, but those 3 sentences made his hands shake a little. The message said, "The Zelphic wanted humans to give up New Beeson." The message said they would not listen to peaceful talk. The message said it was time to use Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something Min-soo had hoped he would never have to think about. It was a plan that had been made 50 years ago when humans first started exploring space. It was a plan that very few people knew about. Even on Earth, most humans thought their government was peaceful and only wanted to explore and make friends with aliens, but Min-soo knew the truth. He knew that while humans were smiling and talking about peace with other species, they were also preparing for war. They were preparing for the day when someone would try to hurt innocent people, and peaceful talk would not be enough to stop them. Deep under the city of Seoul, there was a place that did not exist on any map. It was a huge underground complex with rooms full of computers and screens and people working day and night. Admiral Lee Dongwoo was in charge of This secret place, he was a tall man with gray hair and serious eyes who had spent his whole life getting ready for this daily, stood in the main control room surrounded by screens that showed star maps and ship positions and weapon systems. The screens showed things that most people in the galaxy did not know existed: human battle fleets that were hidden in empty space, human weapons that were disguised as peaceful research stations, human soldiers who were pretending to be farmers, and shopkeepers. For 50 years humans had been very careful to look weak and peaceful. They had made sure that other species thought humans were soft and emotional and preferred talking to fighting. They had hidden their real strength so well that even their closest allies had no idea what humans were really capable of. Every human colony that looked like a peaceful farm or trading post was actually a hidden fortress. Every human trade ship that carried food and supplies also carried weapons that could destroy entire cities. Every human diplomat who smiled and talked about peace was also a trained spy and soldier. The galaxy thought humans were the weakest species in space. They thought humans survived by being clever and making friends and avoiding fights. They had no idea that humans were actually one of the most dangerous species that had ever existed on the colony world of New Bizin. Governor Cho Ji-won walked through the main city watching people go about their normal lives. She saw children going to school and parents going to work and old people sitting in cafes drinking tea and talking about the weather. Everything looked completely normal and peaceful, but Ji-won knew what was hidden beneath this normal life. She knew that under the schools there were command centers with advanced computers and communication systems. She knew that the farmers' tools could be turned into weapons in just a few hours. She knew that every single person in the city, from the youngest teenager to the oldest grandmother, knew exactly what to do when the warning alarm sounded. The coffee shop on the corner was not just a coffee shop. The man who served drinks there was actually a retired military officer who had fought in 3 different wars. The woman who sold flowers in the market was an expert in explosives and could make bombs from everyday materials. The children who played in the parks had been learning military tactics along with their regular school lessons. New Bizin looked like any other peaceful human colony, but it was actually a trap waiting to be sprung. The Zelthek had no idea what they were walking into when they decided to attack this world. They thought they were threatening helpless civilians, but they were actually threatening a planet full of hidden soldiers in space stations throughout the galaxy. Other humans were getting ready too. The trading posts that sold food and medicine to alien worlds were quietly packing up their goods. The research stations that studied stars and planets were powering up equipment that had never been used before. The passenger ships that carried human tourists to see alien worlds were suddenly changing course and heading home. Dr. Kim Soo-min worked at a research station near the edge of Vorthen space. She had been there for 2 years, studying cosmic radiation and making friends with the local alien scientists. But when the coded message arrived, she stopped her research and began activating systems that had been built into the station from the beginning. The Vorthen scientists who worked with her had no idea that their peaceful research station was actually a military listening post. They did not know that Dr. Kim was not just a scientist, but also an intelligence officer. They did not know that the equipment they used to study space was also capable of monitoring alien communications and tracking alien ship movements all across the galaxy. The same thing was happening. Human civilians were quietly transforming into something else. Human research stations were revealing their true purpose. Human trade ships were dropping their peaceful disguises and showing their real weapons. The Zelthek had made a terrible mistake. They had threatened innocent people and refused to listen to peaceful solutions. They had pushed humans past the point where talking could solve the problem. And now they were going to learn why humans had stayed quiet for so long back in the underground command center. Admiral Lee was coordinating with human forces throughout the galaxy. The screens around him showed the positions of Zelthek ships and the readiness of human weapon systems that had been hidden for decades. Captain Song Kyung was on New Bizin preparing her troops for the coming battle. Her soldiers looked like ordinary colonists, but they were actually some of the best trained fighters in the galaxy. They had been living normal lives as farmers and shopkeepers while secretly practicing for this moment. Sergeant Hanamin was checking his weapons, which were disguised as farming equipment. His plasma rifle looked like a tool for harvesting crops, but it could destroy a tank with one shot. His communications gear was built into what looked like a simple radio for listening to music all over New Bizan. People were making the same preparations. Children were being moved to safe locations that looked like ordinary basements but were actually armored bunkers. Adults were taking positions that seemed random but were actually carefully planned defensive positions. The Zelthic thought they were attacking a defenseless world full of peaceful farmers and traders. They had no idea that they were walking into a trap that had been 50 years in the making. They had no idea that every human colony was actually a military base waiting to be activated. Governor Jiwan stood in her office looking out at the city where people were calmly going about their evening routines. But she knew that behind every window and in every building, humans were making final preparations for war. They were checking weapons and reviewing plans and getting ready to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. The Zelthic had given them 10 days to surrender. That was their first mistake because it gave humans time to make sure everything was ready. Their second mistake was thinking that humans would run away or give up when faced with superior force. Their third mistake was not understanding that when humans stopped talking, it meant they were done being peaceful. In a few hours, the Zelthic fleet would arrive expecting to find a helpless world ready to surrender. Instead, they would find something that no species in the galaxy had ever seen before. They would find out what happened when humans decided that quiet diplomacy was not enough. The calm before the storm was ending, and the storm that was coming would change everything in the galaxy forever. The Zelthic war fleet was huge and terrifying as it moved through space toward New Bisen. There were hundreds of ships of all sizes. The biggest ones were like floating cities made of dark metal with weapons sticking out from every surface. The smaller ships buzzed around them like angry insects ready to attack anything that moved. Fleet Commander Vorthak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the largest ship in the fleet. The ship was over 1 kilometer long and had enough weapons to destroy an entire moon. He looked out through the main viewing window at the human colony world spinning slowly in space. It looked so peaceful and helpless. The planet was green and blue with white clouds floating over the surface. It looked like a perfect place for people to live and raise families. Vorthak could see the lights of cities twinkling on the dark side of the planet, and he knew that millions of humans were down there, probably scared and waiting for his army to arrive. This is going to be easy, he thought to himself. He had conquered 47 worlds in his long career as a military commander. He had fought against species that were much stronger and more advanced than humans. He had defeated enemies that had better weapons and more ships than the humans could ever dream of having. The humans were known throughout the galaxy as weak creatures who preferred talking to fighting. They were famous for being emotional and caring too much about other people. They always tried to solve problems with words instead of weapons. Most species thought humans were too soft to be good at war. Vorthak called his sensor officer over to his command station. Scan the entire system, he ordered. Show me what pathetic defenses these humans have prepared. I want to see everything they have so I can laugh at how weak they are. The sensor officer was a young Zelthic warrior who had never been in a real battle before. He was excited to be part of such an important invasion. He activated the powerful scanning equipment and began studying the human colony system. The scans showed exactly what Vorthak had expected to see. There were a few small space stations orbiting the planet, but they looked like simple trading posts and research facilities. There were some mining platforms in the asteroid belt, but they seemed to be shut down and abandoned. There were maybe a dozen small patrol ships flying around the planet, but they were tiny compared to even the smallest Zelthic warship. It was pathetic. Vorthak thought the humans had not even tried to build proper defenses. They had not called for help from other species. They had not evacuated their people to safety. They were just sitting there waiting to be conquered like sheep, waiting to be eaten by wolves. Vorthak activated the communication system to send his final ultimatum to the planet below. He wanted to give the humans one last chance to surrender before he began the attack. He was feeling generous today and thought he might let some of them live if they gave up without a fight. The face that appeared on his screen was that of Governor Cho Ji-won. She looked like a typical human woman, small and soft with dark hair and gentle eyes. She was sitting in what looked Like a simple office with windows showing the peaceful city outside. Humans of New Bizan, Vorthak said in his deep, grinding voice. You have 1 day to evacuate your world completely. After that, we will begin our invasion. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your colony. We will kill every human on this planet if you do not surrender immediately. Expected to see fear in the human woman's eyes. He expected her to beg for mercy or to try to negotiate for more time. He expected her to break down and cry like so many other species had done when faced with Zelphic power. Instead, Governor Jiwan looked directly at him with calm, steady eyes. She did not seem afraid or worried at all. She spoke in a quiet voice that was somehow more unsettling than any scream would have been. Commander Vorthak, she said, I have a message for you from the human government. Vorchak leaned forward, expecting to hear terms of surrender or desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, the human woman said, just one word. No, that was all. Just one simple word. Then the communication ended and the screen went black. Vorthak stared at the empty screen, completely confused. He had never received such a response before. Usually, when he threatened a world, the leaders would spend hours trying to negotiate. They would offer him money or resources or anything else they could think of to make him go away, but this human had just said no and then stopped talking. It made no sense. Why would they refuse to surrender? When they had no way to fight back, why would they choose to die instead of just leaving their planet? Meanwhile, across the galaxy, something strange was happening that most aliens had not noticed yet. Human ships that had been peacefully docked at alien space stations for months were suddenly leaving all at the same time. Human diplomats were packing up their offices and returning to human space. Human trade missions were canceling their contracts and going home. The Vorthan Intelligence Service was the first to notice the pattern. Their top analyst was a sharp-minded creature named Kex who had been studying human behavior for years. She brought her report to her supervisor, an old and experienced Vorthan named Velser. She said, we are seeing very unusual human activity across 17 different sectors. They appear to be withdrawing from all normal operations at the same time. This has never happened before. Vel studied the data with growing worry. He had been working in intelligence for 30 years and he had never seen anything like this. Have you found any explanation for this behavior? He asked. Kex looked through her files and found something that made her blood run cold. Sir, I found references in human historical databases. They call this pattern pulling back the curtain. Vel had studied human history more than most aliens, and he knew that phrase meant something very bad. When humans pulled back the curtain, it meant they were about to show their true nature. It meant they were done pretending to be weak and peaceful. On New Bizan, the final preparations were being made. Captain Song Kyung was positioning her troops throughout the forest outside the main city. Her soldiers looked like ordinary farmers and hunters, but they were actually elite warriors who had been training for this moment their entire lives. Each soldier carried weapons that looked like simple tools but were actually advanced military equipment. Their camouflage systems made them almost invisible, even to sophisticated sensors. Their communication devices were built into everyday objects like watches and jewelry. Sergeant Han Yemin was setting up his heavy plasma rifle in a position that gave him a clear view of the landing zone where the Zelphic ships would probably try to land. The weapon looked like a piece of farm equipment, but it could destroy a tank with one shot. All across the planet, similar preparations were being made. Ordinary-looking buildings were revealing hidden weapon systems. Peaceful farmers were taking positions that turned out to be carefully planned defensive lines. Even children were helping by carrying messages and supplies to the adult fighters. The Zelphic fleet moved into orbit around New Bizan and began preparing for the invasion. Vorthak was still confused by the human governor's strange response, but he decided it did not matter. The humans were obviously too scared to think clearly, and it would make his job easier. He gave the order to begin the attack. Thousands of dropships launched from the main fleet carrying elite Zelphic warriors toward the planet's surface. The soldiers were equipped with the finest weapons and armor that Zelphic technology could produce. They were confident that they would crush any resistance in a matter of hours. As the first wave of dropships entered the atmosphere, Vorthak watched from his command ship. He was expecting to see the humans running in panic or trying to hide in their cities. Instead, he saw something that made no sense at all. The planet below looked completely calm and peaceful. There were no signs of panic or evacuation. The cities were still lit up normally, and there was no unusual activity anywhere. People seemed to be going about their normal daily routines as if nothing was happening. It was almost like the humans did not care that they were being invaded, like they were not worried at all about the thousands of armed warriors that were about to land on their world. Vorthak was starting to get a bad feeling about this invasion. Something was not right, but he could not figure out what it was. The humans were acting like they knew something that he did not know. In a few more minutes his troops would land and begin the conquest of New Bizan. Then he would find out what the humans were really up to. But deep down he was beginning to worry that he had made a terrible mistake. The invasion began just as the sun was rising over New Bizan. The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft colors of pink and gold, making the world look beautiful and peaceful. It was hard to believe that thousands of enemy soldiers were about to land on this pretty planet. The Zelphic dropships came down like a dark cloud blocking out the morning sun. There were so many of them that they looked like a swarm of metal insects. Each ship carried 50 of the finest Zelphic warriors armed with weapons that could cut through steel and armor that could stop bullets. Commander Vorthak watched from his flagship as his forces spread out across the planet. He had planned this invasion carefully. His troops would land at 12 different locations around the main cities. Then they would move in and capture the government buildings and communication centers. Within hours, the entire planet would be under Zelphic control. For the first hour, everything went exactly as planned. The drop ships landed without any problems, and the Zelphic warriors began marching toward their targets. There was no sign of human military forces anywhere. No missiles were fired at the landing ships. No defensive positions tried to stop the advancing troops. The Zelphic soldiers were some of the best fighters in the galaxy. They were 3 times as strong as humans, and their weapons were much more advanced. They wore armor that was almost impossible to damage, and they had been trained to fight since they were children. But then something strange happened. The first dropship simply exploded. It happened so fast that Vorthak almost missed it. 1 second, a transport ship carrying 50 warriors was flying toward the capital city. The next second, it was a ball of fire falling from the sky. The explosion was so bright that it lit up the morning sky like a second sun. What happened? Vorthak shouted at his sensor officer. The officer looked confused and scared. I don't know, sir, the scanners show no enemy weapons fire. There were no missiles launched from the ground. The ship just exploded from the inside. Before Vorthak could ask any more questions, another ship died, then another and another. Within minutes, dropships were falling from the sky all across the planet. The Zelphic warriors, who had already landed, found themselves under attack, but they could not see who was shooting at them. The enemy seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Zelphic soldiers would be marching through a peaceful-looking farm when suddenly their comrades would start falling down dead. There were no muzzle flashes, no sounds of gunfire, no sign of where the attacks were coming from. Captain Song Kyung moved through the forest like a ghost. Her advanced camouflage system made her invisible to both the naked eye and electronic sensors. She had been trained for this kind of warfare since she was a teenager, and she was very good at either. Target was a group of Zelphic soldiers who were trying to reach the main road into the city. There were 20 of them, and they were all heavily armed and armored. They thought they were safe because they could not see any enemies around them. Song signaled to her team using hand gestures that made no sound. Her soldiers were positioned in a perfect circle around the enemy. Each one had a clear shot at multiple targets. They waited for her command. The Zelphic warriors never knew what hit them. The human weapons made no sound when they fired, and the energy beams were invisible to the naked eye. In less than 3 seconds, all 20 enemy soldiers were dead. Their advanced armor had been useless against weapons that seemed to ignore physical defenses. Sergeant Han Yumin was in position on a hill overlooking the main landing zone. His plasma rifle was disguised to look like a piece of farm equipment, but it was actually one of the most powerful weapons ever created. He could see a Zelphic command vehicle approaching his position. The vehicle was huge and heavily armored with enough weapons to destroy a small city. It was surrounded by smaller vehicles and dozens of soldiers on foot. The Zelphic commander inside probably thought he was completely safe. Han took careful aim and fired once the plasma beam hit the command vehicle, and it simply vanished in a flash of blue light. The explosion was so complete that there was not even any debris left behind. The other Zelthic soldiers looked around in panic, trying to figure out what had happened to their commanders. All across New Bizan, the same thing was happening. The Zelthic forces were being destroyed by an enemy they could not see or understand. The humans were using technology that seemed impossible in fighting. With a skill that no one had expected in the capital city, ordinary people were joining the fight. A man who ran a small restaurant put down his cooking tools and picked up a weapon that had been hidden in his kitchen. A woman who taught schoolchildren activated a communication system that had been built into her classroom. Even elderly people were helping. An old man who sold newspapers on the street corner was actually coordinating air defenses from his small booth. A grandmother who fed birds in the park was using her innocent-looking bird-watching equipment to spot enemy movements. The Zelthic had expected to fight against a few poorly trained militia groups. Instead, they found themselves fighting against an entire planet of soldiers who had been preparing for this battle their whole lives. Up in Space Commander, Vorthak was watching his invasion fall apart. He could not understand what was happening. His sensors showed that the humans had no advanced weapons or military technology, but somehow they were destroying his forces with ease. He tried to call for reinforcements from the main Zelthic fleet, but when he activated his communication system, an unexpected voice answered. Instead of his own commanders, "This is Admiral Li Dongwu of the Human Defense Force," the voice said calmly. "I am afraid your reinforcements will not be coming." Vorthak felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. That was impossible. The main Zelthic fleet consisted of over 300 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. There was no way the humans could threaten them. "You are lying," he said. "Humans have no military force capable of threatening our home fleet. We have studied your species for years. You are weak and peaceful and have no real weapons. That is what we wanted you to believe," Admiral Li replied. "Would you like to see the truth?" The main screen in Vorthak's command center flickered to life, showing a view of space near the Zelthic homeworld, where the mighty Zelthic fleet had been patrolling. There was now only floating debris and the sleek forms of ships that should not have existed. The human warships were unlike anything Vorthak had ever seen. They were not big and bulky like Zelthic vessels, but sleek and deadly looking. They moved through space with impossible grace, and their weapons created beams of energy that could cut through the heaviest armor like it was made of paper. In the center of the human fleet was a massive space station that seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. It was shaped like a star with long arms reaching out in all directions. The station was surrounded by smaller platforms that bristled with weapons and defensive systems. "What is that thing?" Vorthak whispered. "That," Admiral Li said, "is what we have been building while you thought we were just talking. It is called Hope Station, and it is the most powerful weapon ever created in this galaxy." The space station began to glow brighter as its main weapon system charged up. The energy buildup was so intense that it made the nearby stars look dim in comparison. When the weapon fired, it created a beam of pure destruction that could be seen from 1,000 light years away. The beam hit a small moon that had been used as a Zelthic military base. The moon did not explode or break apart. It simply ceased to exist, as if it had never been there. Vorthak stared at the screen in complete shock. He had spent his entire life believing that the Zelthic were the strongest species in the galaxy. He had conquered dozens of worlds and defeated enemies that were supposed to be much more advanced than humans, but now he realized that everything he thought he knew was wrong. The humans had not been weak and peaceful at all. They had been pretending to be weak while secretly building the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. On the surface of New Bizan, the last of the Zelthic forces were surrendering. Governor Jiwan stood in her office looking out at the city, where people were already beginning to clean up after the battle. The invasion that was supposed to last for days had been over in less than 6 hours. The humans had not just won, they had won so completely that it was embarrassing. The mighty Zelthic war machine had been destroyed by farmers and shopkeepers and school teachers who had revealed themselves to be the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy. The secret was out now. The galaxy would know that humans were not the peaceful weaklings they had pretended to be, and that knowledge would change everything forever. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, every species in known space had heard about what happened at New Bizan. The story was so unbelievable that many people thought it was a lie or a mistake, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting that was bigger than any gathering in recorded history. Representatives from every known species came to the Great Chamber on the neutral world of Harmony Station. Even species that had not spoken to each other in decades put aside their differences to attend this historic session. Huge round chamber was packed with more aliens than it had ever held before. The air was thick with tension and the smell of fear. Every creature in the room was trying to understand what this meant for the future of the galaxy. If humans had been hiding such incredible power all along, what else did they know about other species? Ambassador Kim Hana walked into the chamber and the entire room fell silent. Everyone stared at her as she made her way to the human delegation table. She looked exactly the same as she had during the last meeting, small and quiet and peaceful. But now everyone knew that her appearance was deceiving. She sat down in her chair and folded her hands on the table just like she had done before. But this time, when she looked around the room, every alien who met her eyes quickly looked away. None of them wanted to be the focus of her attention now that they knew what humans were really capable of. The Vorthan delegate Crix was the first to speak, but his voice was shaking with fear. Ambassador Hana, he said, we need to understand what has happened. How long have humans been hiding their true capabilities? Why did you deceive us about your military strength? Other voices joined in from around the chamber. The Nexari sang questions in their crystal voices, but the songs were fearful and confused. The Mindari whispered urgently among themselves, trying to figure out what this meant for their own safety. Finally, Hana stood up and the entire chamber became completely quiet. Everyone waited to hear what she would say. The last time she had spoken in this chamber, she had been known as the voice of peace and reason. Now she was something much more dangerous. For 50 years, she began her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the huge room. We have tried to resolve conflicts through diplomacy. We have negotiated treaties, prevented wars, and sought peaceful solutions to every crisis. We believe that reason and compassion could overcome aggression and greed. She paused and looked directly at the small group of surviving Zelthic representatives. They were minor officials who had been hastily promoted after their superiors were killed or captured. They looked terrified and kept glancing at the exits as if they were planning to run away. We were wrong, she continued. Some species only understand strength, some civilizations only respect force. Some threats can only be stopped by showing them the consequences of their actions. The chamber was so quiet that you could hear the breathing of hundreds of different alien species. Everyone was hanging on her every word, trying to understand what this meant for their own future. The Zelthic Confederation chose to threaten innocent civilians. Hana said, her voice getting slightly harder. They chose to ignore diplomatic solutions. They chose to believe that might makes right now. They have learned the price of those choices. A Corvan delegate stood up nervously. Ambassador Hana, he said, his deep voice trembling, what does this mean for the rest of us? We have all had conflicts with humans in the past. Are we now in danger from your hidden fleets? Hana looked at him with those dark eyes that everyone now knew could be very dangerous. That depends, she said. Are you planning to attack human colonies? Are you planning to enslave innocent people? Are you planning to ignore our attempts at peaceful negotiation? The Corvan quickly shook his head. No, no, of course not. We want peace with humanity. We have always wanted peace. Then you have nothing to fear, Hana replied. But understand this, the age of taking advantage of human kindness is over. We will continue to work for peace and cooperation, but we will not allow anyone to mistake our preference for diplomacy as weakness. Back on New Bizan, Governor Jawan was dealing with the aftermath of the invasion. The Zelthic prisoners were being held in comfortable facilities while their fate was decided. The human casualties had been incredibly light, only a few dozen injured, and no deaths at all. The city looked completely normal again. The hidden weapon systems had been retracted back into their concealed positions. The soldiers had returned to their jobs as farmers and shopkeepers and teachers. The orbital defense platforms had been disguised once again as simple communication satellites, but everyone knew that life would never be the same. The secret was out now, and there was no going back. The galaxy had seen what humans could do when they were pushed too far. President Park Min-soo addressed the human population across all colonies and worlds. His message was broadcast to every human settlement in the galaxy, and many alien worlds were listening as well today. We showed the galaxy who we really are, he said. Not because we wanted to, but because we had to, not because we enjoy war, but because we refuse to let innocent people suffer at the hands of bullies and tyrants. He looked directly into the camera, his face serious, but calm. We are still the same people we have always been. We still prefer negotiation to conflict. We still believe in peace and cooperation, but we will never again allow others to think that our love of peace makes us weak. The message was being translated into hundreds of alien languages and broadcast across the galaxy within hours. Every intelligent species in known space had heard the human president's words around the galaxy. Other changes were happening very quickly. The Brock hegemony, which had been planning to invade 3 smaller worlds, suddenly decided that diplomatic negotiation would be better. The stellar corsairs, who had been raiding trade routes for decades, announced that they were retiring from piracy. The Vex Collective, which had been enslaving primitive species for their labor, suddenly discovered that they could afford to pay fair wages. The Zephyr Empire, which had been threatening to blockade the trade routes through their space, decided that keeping the routes open would be more profitable. It was amazing how quickly aggressive species became interested in peaceful solutions when they realized that humans were not the helpless victims they had appeared to be. In the weeks that followed the new Bison incident, delegations from dozens of species came to human space wanting to negotiate new treaties and trade agreements. Species that had ignored human diplomats for decades were now eager to sign cooperation agreements. The Galactic Council voted to give humans a permanent seat on the Security Committee with veto power over any military actions. Many species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly found ways to resolve their differences peacefully. Captain Song Kyung returned to her job as a farmer on New Bizan, but now when she walked through the fields, other species representatives would come to visit her. They wanted to see the human who had defeated elite Zelphic warriors with such ease. She would serve them tea and talk about crop rotations and weather patterns, and they would listen politely while trying to figure out how someone who seemed so normal and peaceful could be such a deadly fighter. Sergeant Han Ya-min went back to work at the Agricultural Research Station where he had been employed before the invasion. But now his research on crop genetics was being studied by alien scientists who wondered if humans had found ways to weaponize their farming techniques. The truth was that humans had always been good at adapting and surviving. They had learned to be peaceful when peace was possible and deadly when violence was necessary. They had hidden their true capabilities not because they were ashamed of them, but because they hoped they would never need to use them. But now the galaxy knew the truth. When humans stayed quiet, it was not because they were weak or scared, it was because they were deciding whether the situation could be solved with words or if it was time to stop talking and start fighting. And everyone had learned that when humans stopped talking, that was when you should really start to worry. The galaxy had become a much more peaceful place overnight simply because everyone now understood what the consequences of aggression could be. The age of human diplomatic weakness was over. The age of peace through strength had begun. 6 months had passed since the day the galaxy learned the truth about humanity. The universe had become a very different place, and most of the changes were good ones. Wars that had been going on for decades suddenly ended with peace treaties. Piracy dropped to almost nothing as criminals decided that robbing ships was too dangerous when humans might be watching. The Galactic Council had been completely reorganized, with humans taking a much more important role in keeping peace between species. But this time their authority came not just from their skill at talking, but from the clear understanding that they had the power to enforce their decisions. Ambassador Kim Hannah sat in her new office, which was much bigger than her old one. The walls were covered with peace treaties and trade agreements that had been signed in the past 6 months. More progress had been made toward galactic peace in half a year than in the previous 50 years. She was reading reports from across the galaxy about conflicts that were being resolved through negotiation instead of violence. The Corvan Empire had not only stopped their aggressive expansion, but had actually started sharing their advanced mining technology with smaller worlds that needed help. The stellar pirates, who had terrorized trade routes for generations, had mostly given up their criminal careers. Many of them had applied for jobs with legitimate shipping companies. Some had even joined human security forces to help protect. The very ships they used to rub on her desk was a report about the former Zelphic territories. The remaining Zelphic population had been relocated to a few worlds, where they could live peacefully under human supervision, the worlds they had conquered, or being returned to their original inhabitants with human help to rebuild what had been destroyed. President Park Min-soo was meeting with his advisors in the same office where he had first learned about the Zelphic threat to New Bizan. The reports on his desk showed crime statistics that would have seemed impossible just 6 months ago. Piracy is down 70%, he told Admiral Lee Dongwoo. Slave trading has almost completely disappeared. The number of conflicts requiring military intervention is the lowest in recorded galactic history. Lee nodded thoughtfully. It seems that sometimes the threat of violence is more effective than actual violence. The galaxy understands now that our preference for peace does not mean we are incapable of defending ourselves. The human colonies were thriving as never before. Trade with other species had increased dramatically as aliens who had once seen humans as weak customers now treated them as valuable partners. New technologies were being shared openly as species that had guarded their secrets for centuries decided that cooperation was better than competition. On New Bizan, life had returned to what looked like normal. Children played in the parks just like they had before the invasion. Farmers worked in their fields and merchants sold their goods in busy markets, but everyone knew that beneath this peaceful surface lay a strength that could shake the foundations of the galaxy. Governor Jiwon often walked through the same streets she had walked before the crisis, meeting the same people and seeing the same sights, but there was something different now. In the eyes of every person she met, she saw a quiet confidence that had not been there before. The people of New Bisan had proven to themselves and to the galaxy that they were not helpless victims waiting to be rescued. They were strong, capable people who could defend themselves and their families when necessary, but who